Today we're at Fort Gregg on the Petersburg battlefield. Union assault on April 2nd, 1865 broke through the Confederate lines to our front. 54th Pennsylvania and the Army of the James received orders to help exploit the breakthrough. Their advance brought them here, on the outskirts of Petersburg and facing two Confederate forts, Fort Whitworth and Fort Gregg. Two brigades from the 1st Division attacked Fort Gregg, but they and subsequent reinforcements were pinned down in the ditch surrounding the front of the fort. And you can see the ditch. We move over here towards the fort itself. At 2:15 p.m., the 24th Corps commander, General John Gibbon, ordered the independent division into battle. Colonel Curtis shouted, "Fix bayonets." The bugle's warning note sounded the call for an advance, remembered Sergeant Marshall Van Scoten, and the line of battle, like the tread of a mighty giant, moved quickly across the intervening distance. Seeing the regiment in front of him start to waver, Major Nathan Davis yelled, "Forward, 54th!" The regiment surged forward with the rest of the brigade. The 54th Pennsylvania moved forward at the double quick. The brigade crossed the swampy ravine to our front and started up the rise on the other side. The Confederates, under fire from the Federal troops at the fort, fired high. Major Nathan Davis fell wounded within 100 yards of the fort, approximately where that tree line would be today. As he struggled to pull himself forward and keep up, Major Davis left a trail of blood. Near the fort, the men let out a yell and charged, running up the walls of the fort. The reinforcements allowed the Federals to surge up the walls and onto the parapet. Sergeant Steinman remembered, the 54th Pennsylvania gained the ditches around the parapet of the fort first, and in a few more minutes, the interior. Major Davis crawled up the wall of Fort Gregg and stood on top of the parapet, waving his sword to encourage his men forward, just in front of us. That top of the wall is where Nathan Davis would have been standing. Suddenly he fell again, pierced through the heart with a musket ball. Colonel Curtis later wrote, Major Davis nobly led on in the charge after being severely wounded and was killed after climbing the parapet. Sergeant Steinman added, the regiment greatly lament the loss of Major Davis. The 54th Pennsylvania crossed the moat, sometimes literally on the backs and heads of the men from the earlier attacks. They ran up the slippery west wall and did not stop until they reached the top. Private Charles Barkley reached the top and pulled his comrades up with him. He maintained his perilous position by throwing sand and dirt into the eyes of Fort Gregg's defenders, and he continued to pull up his comrades. The 54th Pennsylvania's color bearer, Sergeant James Ryan, made it to the top of the parapet and planted the regiment's flags into the dirt directly in front of us. Immediately he collapsed and fell with the colors into Fort Gregg. Sergeant Michael Lohr ignored his own safety and jumped down into the fort. He pulled the 54th Pennsylvania's colors from under Sergeant Ryan's lifeless body, climbed back atop the rampart, and urged the men of the 54th Pennsylvania forward. The additional men from General Turner's division led a surge up the walls. All three attack waves fought their way up to the parapet. For 20 minutes, a desperate hand-to-hand engagement broke out as the defender and attacker used the bayonet and butt of the rifle to lethal effect. The Federals' sheer numbers drove the Confederates back into the fort, where the desperate struggle continued. And we're going to pause the video here and go around the back so you can see the interior of the fort. So we're now inside Fort Gregg. More and more Union soldiers made it up onto the parapet. They shot down the remaining defenders. The Confederates swung empty rifle butts at the attackers or fought with their bayonets. Some, completely out of ammunition, resorted to throwing bricks and rocks at the Federals. For over 20 minutes, Fort Gregg turned into a smoking cauldron of mud and blood. One Confederate defender recalled, Gregg raged like the crater of a volcano, emitting its flashes of deadly fires, enveloped in flames and cloud. Men shot, stabbed, and beat each other with such ferocity the survivors called the attackers a horde of merciless barbarians. The remaining Confederates fought bravely on, but as more Federals poured into Fort Gregg, they started to surrender. In their frenzy, some Union soldiers shot or bayoneted a few Confederates trying to surrender. Eventually, they gained control of their emotions and stopped fighting as well. 24th Corps exhausted itself in the attacks on Fort Gregg and did not launch an attack on the thinly manned inner defensive line before nightfall. General Gibbon recalled, the skirmishers established a heavy picket line and allowed his tired men to rest. The 54th Pennsylvania felt pride in what they accomplished that day. Sergeant Steinman wrote, this regiment did its full part in forcing Lee's line on the left of Petersburg. And the fort walls directly in front of us, that would have been where the 54th Pennsylvania would have climbed to the top of the parapet. And if we turn around behind us, Petersburg itself is off in that direction, about a mile or so behind that tree line. Thank you for watching this episode of In the Footsteps of the 54th.